Okay, well, hello everyone. Thank you for watching and listening in to this presentation. Big warm welcome on behalf of myself and my fellow presenters, Ian and Richard, and a special thanks to Richard as well for stepping up or standing in for Rob Shinky, who's unable to attend or present today. I hope everyone out there is safe, well, and healthy in what are very challenging times at the moment. So we hope this next half hour or 40 minutes will be entertaining and informative for you with regards the topic matter. Just to give you a bit of context, the origins of today's session go back to the JASP conference back in Phoenix in 2016, when myself, Ian, and Stuart Cottrell, who was the editor of case studies back then, we were all asked in our positions as editors of the three journals to sort of prepare a session on some advice for the JASP audience around publishing in the three respective journals, and to give a bit of context and to outline that. So that went down relatively well, I think, because we were asked to do it again 2 years later, and now we've done it on a sort of a 2-yearly basis where we present. We try not to do it every year because it can be a little bit Groundhog Day for some people. But yes, every 2 years we sort of present on the three journals, and essentially the aim of the session really today is by the end of it, hopefully you'll have a better idea of what it takes to publish in the three respective journals, and a sort of a pathway, if you like, or a roadmap to how we go about sort of engaging in that publication process. So initially, in terms of the content of the session today, each of us will talk a little bit about our respective journals' mission statements, in terms of the aim of the journal, the audience it seeks to reach out to. Then we'll talk a little bit about the submission profiles in terms of the number of submissions that we get in, the types of manuscripts that the journal is seeking to look for. Then we'll talk a little bit about sort of more generally about the review and submission process. I will start with talking about the review process and engaging with reviewers and the expectations of reviewers if you're asked to take part in the review process, which is vitally important to ensuring the wheels of the submission process run smoothly. And then we'll sort of round off the session talking about some publication hacks, if you like, some advice around how best to prepare a manuscript for submission, and then also how to deal with the review process itself and submit through. Unfortunately, we can't take questions because this is pre-recorded, but I'm sure myself, Ian, and Rich or Rob Shinky as the editor will more than happily welcome some informal inquiries over email about the presentation in the near future as well. Okay, so I'll start off as editor of JASP, just to kick through JASP and its kind of remit and overview. In terms of its mission statement, the two sort of big things for me for JASP focus on significant advancement of research in applied sports psychology arena or applied sports psychology area. So essentially for me, JASP is interested in submissions that are scientifically based, but have the potential to make a significant contribution to knowledge and understanding in the applied sports psychology area. There are a lot of journals, academic journals in the sport and exercise psychology field out there, and JASP's remit is very much focused on application of research and understanding to a professional practice and applied sports psychology context. In terms of the types of designs and methodologies that we encourage within JASP, it's a very broad church, both qualitative and quantitative submissions, through from experimental studies, correlational work, various types of qualitative research and designs, and also position papers and sort of critical reviews. The key underpinning factor for JASP essentially is quality work that is looking to make a significant advancement to applied sports psychology research area. If it's not applied sports psychology focus or applied sport and exercise psychology focus, then it probably falls outside of the JASP remit and probably would sit best in maybe a broader sport and exercise psychology journal. So essentially, if you're interested in submitting to JASP, then the work's got to be potentially significant, but we're very much interested in work that describes what applied sports psychology practice is all about, and research and designs and interventions that show how effective applied sports psychology research can be or is in that context. Okay, so in terms of the JASP submission profile, we get a large volume of papers relative to a lot of other journals. Past 12 months, we've had 385 original papers submitted. So more than one a day getting sort of submitted to us. So quite a large volume. And likely a lot of that is to do with the current sort of COVID pandemic situation, where I think a lot of staff are having a little bit more time on their hands, or have been over the recent months, to sort of engage in writing activities. So we do get a lot of submissions in. The large amount of submissions, given the fact that we only issue 6 volumes a year, or 6 issues a year, and that means around about 36 to 38 papers can be published each year in the journal, then the acceptance rate is around sort of 11 to sort of 13% on average. And last year's acceptance rate was 11%. So essentially, if you're getting 380 papers and there's only 38 slots each year, then between sort of 10 and 13% sort of acceptance rate would be kind of be sort of fitting within that. We do get a lot of manuscripts that don't go out for review. They get rejected at the desktop on arrival, and I'll talk a little bit more about that on the next slide. But it is important to highlight that it's a very competitive journal. There's a high submission rate, and therefore, because we've got a limited number of slots each year for publication, there's going to be a relatively low acceptance rate, maybe in comparative to some other outlets. In terms of the review process, our stats show we've still got a relatively healthy review turnaround. So from the first submission to a first decision on a manuscript takes around 24 days. And on average, if you submit a paper to JASP, you should be able to get a first decision or review outcome within 28 days, within that 3 to 4 week period. It's proving challenging at the moment to A, engaging with reviewers, and B, getting reviewers to submit their reviews on time, because of obviously the challenges around sort of the academic workloads and returning to teaching online, etc. But our statistics are relatively healthy in that sort of sense. And for those of you who've got faculty heads who are natural scientists, who are obsessed with physiologists or kinesiologists who are obsessed with impact factors, then we've got a relatively healthy impact factor within the journal publication field at the moment. It's something that's sort of relatively stable over the past couple of years, but I know that for some faculty heads and for tenure, particularly over in North America, then the impact factors of journals is considered important as well. So we've got a relatively healthy impact factor in that respect. In terms of the reject statistics, so why did sort of manuscripts get rejected from JASP? The diagram on the left here, or the figure on the left, very simple sort of bar chart, looking at the types of reasons why manuscripts will be rejected from JASP at source, at desktop, on submission, if you like. Those are classified into sort of conceptual areas of rejection. So not making a significant, or not having the potential to make a significant advancement to the literature or the area, or not having a sufficient conceptual or theoretical underpinning. Methodological sort of reasons for rejection sort of fall within a poor quality quantitative or experimental design that maybe lacks control or lacks rigor, or measures that sort of lack rigor. And from a qualitative perspective, it may be manuscripts that lack methodological coherence, or have poor rigor, or lack sort of richness and detail in that outset. Applied refers to a lack of applied sports psychology focus, again within the remit of the journal, or not actually being a sports psychology manuscript. Some manuscripts you receive are sports medicine focused, kinesiology focused, or maybe kinesiology with examining a psychological variable. Or sometimes we get manuscripts that are psychology, looking at a concept within the sport population, but not actually having any applied emphasis or applied focus. And then the last sort of area where we JASP reject is on sort of structural issues. So that may be not adhering to the manuscript page length for submissions, or not being in APA sort of guideline standards, or generally the writing of the manuscript is very poor. But on average, the conceptual, methodological, or applied reasons are the three main reasons why manuscripts get rejected from JASP at source. And the big one really is around that applied focus and that applied remit. So if the manuscript doesn't make an attempt to discuss applied implications of the research, or in the introduction or rationale set up that there is an applied context or potential for the work, then it's probably not quite for JASP, and it doesn't quite get it'll get rejected from that as well. So up to 45% of manuscripts that get rejected initially off the bat from JASP tend to be due to sort of a lack of applied focus or lack of fit within the journal remit. The other two most popular sort of rejection reasons fit within the quality of the work conceptually and methodologically, again, which fits with the overall journal remit around a quality submission that makes a significant contribution to knowledge. And then lastly, just around sort of methodological quality, particularly in relation to qualitative research, we tend to get a 60-40 split in terms of qualitative submissions and quantitative submissions to the journal, which is really healthy, because I think it's important that we describe how we work as sports psychology practitioners and how we engage and understand what are relatively small population groups, particularly in elite sport. And so having diverse methods and methodologies to understand and describe and make sense of experiences in elite sport and other domains within the sporting sector is really important. And a lot of the qualitative work that doesn't get to go for review lacks methodological coherence. So there's an excellent recent paper by Zoe Poucher, Catherine Tammerman and colleagues discussing the research within sports psychology, qualitative research, and examining the notion of sort of methodological coherence and alignment of the research philosophy of the paper, the type of qualitative approach adopted, and how consistently that qualitative approach is adhered to or maintained throughout the course of a manuscript, and what impact that has upon the potential rigor and quality of the work. So I think it's very important for anyone looking to submit the JASP that if you've got qualitative work, please make sure you've got a clear sort of focus and section on your research philosophy, the type of qualitative approach that's adopted, and then ensuring that there's sort of coherence throughout that process. So if you're adopting an IPA perspective, that it's a true IPA paper and it reflects those IPA processes, for example, throughout not just the methods, but also in how the results are presented and interpreted and subsequently discussed. So that's a little bit about JASP, its sort of remit, its submission profile, and maybe some of the reasons why we don't accept manuscripts and they get rejected at source. I'll hand over now to Ian as the editor of the Journal of Sports Psychology in Action, and he'll talk a little bit now about Journal of Sports Psych in Action and its mission statement and remit as well. So over to you, Ian.
Thanks very much, Steve. I'll be relatively short because I think many of the kind of aspects that Steve has already talked about will also kind of apply to the other two journals. However, we're slightly different in the Journal of Sports Psychology in Action in that we're very much about professional development. So you can see from our aim, it's very much about the applied aspect of sport and exercise psychology, but perhaps we've got a slightly wider remit. We're about kind of providing young sports psychologists with useful, sensible, informed guidance that will make an immediate difference to their practice. And likewise, I suggest we'd have probably, a slightly wider audience than psychologists and consultants. We're very much probably aimed at the developing young practitioner. We're looking at their professional development, and hence a lot of our kind of content is much more about how you do it. It's about what works, a bit like Steve's journal, but it's how you deliver it and the real detail. That's what we're looking for, the discursive type of stuff that will help young practitioners develop. Okay, if you want to go on to the second slide, Steve. Again, a little bit about our profile. We are a relatively young journal. We've been going for just over 10 years now. We're now up to probably this year we're probably going to get close to about 100 submissions, so not anywhere near as big as JASP, but we're getting there. Our acceptance rate is much higher. We accept about a third. Our turnaround time is similar to Steve in that we're about 22 days. We also will hopefully get a decision out to an author within about 2 months of submission. I think the biggest difference is that we are not looking for empirical research. We're very much, as I say, that those kind of papers that are more interesting with immediate implications for young practitioners. We also, again, will hope to be appealing to coaches and perhaps practitioners in other sports science disciplines. You know, we're looking at policy, we're looking at critical accounts, we're looking at debates. So we do not want to see that classical quantitative design. We're very different in that you can see we, although we're APA, we tend to work in articles that are about 10 to 12 pages long, not the classical 25 to 30 pages that you'll find in most journals. It's short, sharp, and it's there to make a difference. So we're looking for an engaging writing style. We only ask for 10 to 12 references, so we're not a journal that's going to actually publish 30 references, 40 references that takes up 2 or 3 pages. We want the real meaningful references that are going to help the young practitioner. I suppose the take-home message literally as the next paragraph says, if you were on a bus, the aim is to read one of our articles in that 15-minute journey and then get something useful out of it. So you'd have something to take away that was probably going to make an instant difference to your practice. So short and sharp, we are slightly different. And again, please be aware of that, because that's why we reject a lot of our desktop rejections are made, because people are not listening to our guidance and they are sending us empirical research that we don't really want. Just keep sending that onto Steve. Thanks, Steve. That's me done.
Thanks, Ian. Excellent. Thank you for that. Okay, so that's Journal of Sports Psych in action. Now I'm going to hand over to Rich, Dr. Rich Keegan, who's standing in for Dr. Rob Chinky as editor of case studies in sport and exercise. So, Rich, I'll hand over to you and just tell me when to move the slides on as you see fit.
Will do. Thanks, Steve. So yeah, this is obviously still quite a relatively new journal, but it's targeting trying to get useful messages out there to practitioners, trainees, students and instructors very much through case studies. Now they can take 2 forms. They can either be highly applied, so examples of applied practice, or the recent developments in trying to really emphasize case study methodology in research, but they're quite specific manifestations. And so I'll try and give some examples of how that can work, but that means there's 2 quite specific formats for the papers. One which looks a bit like research, and one which looks a lot more like the case studies that we know practitioners kind of have to do to go through accreditation processes or registration processes. So they must exist. At the moment, those often don't find a home and they just sit in people's hard drives. And we're looking to have a home for those. And I'll try and explain why personally, I think that's very important to actually get examples of applied practice out, peer-reviewed, and then being distributed and read widely. So we can either be reflecting on the experiences of adopting some particular theory or approach or technique, or looking at the very particular form of research, which is case study research. So either of those tends to be fine. Very like Ian said, very empirical forms of research tend not to be a good fit for the journal. And I would say potentially sitting uncomfortably in between the 2 is not a great place to be either. So try and make a decision really early around whether you're an applied case study or a research case study, because they're quite different. I think we can probably move on. So the applied case study format has this relatively unique structure, which can mean that people feel maybe that, what's the point in submitting if we get rejected? There's nowhere else we can take it, because it's a very unique format. However, I had some success recently coaching some people through saying, this isn't that different. You could slot in what you've done to other journal formats. This isn't that different. So the intro, what you did, and then what you found isn't a million miles away from this, but this is how it's been formatted right now in CSSEP for an applied case study. You set up the context, kind of the background, the situation where the work was happening. You try and explain your particular approach to philosophy and how you like to practice. And then you start to build us towards exactly what was done, with who, why, in what order. So ultimately, there's still a kind of, to me, the core of good scientific communication is transparency. So people can see what you did, what happened, and draw lessons from that. And hopefully, you help us reach those lessons in the reflection section. But one of the key issues we have sometimes is that people sometimes sending us papers that were meant for somewhere else and clearly don't fit this format. But sometimes the reviewers in particular can't tell what was done. And so in that middle section where they're saying, I want to know why you did that, exactly what was done and why, that's the heart of the case study. And I suppose the advice I would give you even at this stage is to try and, if you need to, focus on the important bits and not the whole story of this, then that, then all the other things that happened. What's the heart of the case study that you're going to end up drawing your lessons from? Just give us that bit, I think. So it's very much about applied practice. This is the main format. And I suppose when it comes to the reflections at the end, that's often something which can be quite poorly handled, because people want to say, showcase how good the work they did was, think, oh, aren't we fantastic, we did the thing that worked and the athlete went on and won some medals, when actually what we want in that section is lessons for other people to pick up. So we don't want to be left saying, gosh, what a genius, helped the athlete. We want to be left saying, this is really useful for everybody. So we can train future practitioners, we could incorporate into courses, use it ourselves. That's what needs to be in the reflection section. And often that's where people's focus and the reviewers' focus really hammers that point. To the next type. So we have this clear stream for research case studies, usually where you have a small n basically, but you're still able to be more like a research piece, where you might actually set up, okay, here's the introduction, here's the rationale, here is a more familiar looking method section where we describe participants, design, procedure, analysis, and there are very particular forms of method that are suitable for research case studies. So that's what we're really looking for in there. And the heart of it is the same. Is it transparent? Can we tell what was done and why, and what eventuated from that? But this is a more familiar looking narrative in terms of background, method, results, discussion. And hopefully you should be able to see that there's a reasonable difference. So one is very much applied work focusing on the client, and one is much more about, we're trying to test some theory or some concept or some technique and see if it helps the individual client. But one's all about, I think, the applied work, one's all about probably advancing scientific concepts and ideas. But hopefully that structure is more familiar to most of you. Are we on the last one? So I wanted to sort of pause for a second and just emphasize why I think we really need the Journal of Case Studies in Sport Exercise Psychology, because there's a famous gap between researchers and practitioners. They're often doing different things, pursuing different reward structures. One is kind of about testing ideas and getting papers and getting cited, and one is about helping clients and getting reputation and getting kind of impact. Now, they're all meant to be scientific endeavors, but actually, if they are allowed to sort of disconnect, that can persist and it can cause all manner of problems. So there's different ways of addressing that. We can push researchers to do more impactful work. We can obviously, and we do, I think, push practitioners to be more evidence-based and things. But actually, one of the key incentive structures is to have practitioners writing and citing, and therefore, getting the attention of researchers, because they may actually get cited by people using the outputs. So there's important conversations that need to happen, but one of the key kind of carrots that we can dangle is to say there are citations on offer here from practitioners using real research, but that needs to have a home. And so for me personally, this is a nice way of allowing that to happen. And the journal itself is I just went through while Steve was showing the stats from JASP and looked at my own stats as an editor. So I've had basically, just individually, there's 3 of us, but I've had 30 papers, of which just under half have made it through in some format in the end. So that's not bad going, but the reason for that at the moment is there's an awful lot of work going in basically helping practitioners to write very clearly. So something which might come naturally to researchers because we have to do it all the time, we require kind of a little bit more work with the practitioners in terms of the writing, in terms of resolving reviewer comments, because sometimes they're focused on research and it's an applied case study or vice versa. So there's work being done in supporting the papers. And I think you should hopefully get quite a good experience with us because we're trying to really support papers along the way. So at the moment, just under half that came through my inbox on the system made it through eventually. I can't give you time spans right now, but they're normally finding a home, unless there's really nothing we can see in there that would lead it to be either an applied case study with useful outcomes or a research case study with useful outcomes. But yeah, that was my little kind of piece. I think we're very supportive. It can take a bit longer, but we normally find if there's something in there worth persisting with, we will try and persist with it. That's me.
Excellent. Thank you, Richard. That's brilliant. And thank you, Ian, as well. So hopefully that's given a really nice insight into the sort of the 3, a whistle-stop tour, if you like, of the 3 journals. I think there's a lot of distinction about each of the 3. They're very distinct in their sort of their remit and their focus, but there's also an element of commonality across that, and obviously that's the applied sport and exercise psychology nature of the content, if you like, within that. But they are 3 very distinctive journals that provide an avenue and an outlet for the type of work that you as a practitioner or an academic or applied practitioner or applied academic might look to source and to publish or disseminate that sort of work. On the dissemination process now you've had a little flavour of what each of the journals are about. Now sort of like to move on, and we'd like to consider the publication process, if you like. And this is some general thoughts around the publication process from the 3 of us. Each of the journals may have its slight nuances in terms of requirements for publication and support, and as Richard has highlighted there, some of the journals have smaller submissions, and therefore the editorial team and the reviewers are able to invest a little bit more time in supporting those submissions. And maybe at JASP, because of the higher volume of submissions, we have to look a little bit more stringently at the manuscripts that come in order that we manage what goes out for review. But it all starts with reviews, really, and reviewers, and that's the cornerstone of the whole publication process. Without reviewers, we won't have a peer review process, and we don't have a publication process in that sense. We do, but it doesn't become then a critical and sort of independent scientific sort of process. So we just put together a slide here on some thoughts around some expectations for reviewers. If you're invited to review for one of the 3 journals or another journal, or you'd like to take part and engage in reviewing, some basic sort of guidelines and outlines for what would be good. The first one really is reviewing is an excellent way to maintain your CPD, to your ongoing sort of professional development. Even if you don't do anything academically, if you're involved in reviewing, it's a great sort of process. Typically, a manuscript you'll be asked to review will be up to date in terms of the literature in that particular topic area. If you're reviewing that paper, the idea would be that you're relatively an expert or you know something about that area. So reading a paper is an opportunity for you to digest maybe some new sources of literature or concepts or theories or methods in your particular topic area. So rather than some people view reviews as a burden in some senses, actually it's an opportunity to learn a little bit more, to keep in touch with your own subject area or topic area or methodology of choice, and actually a really good sort of nice, concise sort of learning experience in that sort of process as well. So hopefully that's a good sell. Encourage it for your CPD development, whether you're a neophyte academic or practitioner, starting off on the ladder and learning more about a topic area, whether you're a very experienced sort of academic or practitioner further down the line. It's always good to read papers which keep up to date and can keep you up to date, because we're all challenged for time. And if we have a concise summary of the latest literature in the topic area and we engage in the review process, then it's very useful to help with that. From our point of view as editors and associate editors and editorial board members, reviews are vital to help inform the decision-making process. So without reviewers, editors and associate editors have to sort of give their informal opinions, if you like, on a manuscript. And whilst they're very experienced in that process, a good quality review from a reviewer will really help inform to give the authors an excellent sort of review experience. And it'll ultimately make the manuscript stronger, whether that manuscript is accepted or revised and resubmit within the journal, or whether it's rejected and you choose to then amend it and send it elsewhere. A really good review from a reviewer is a very constructive for the whole sort of process and helps everyone. It makes our life a lot easier if we get some constructive reviews, whether they're positive or whether they're a reject. It does help us to make the decision-making process a lot easier. And if we're able to have an easier decision-making process, I'm sure as Ian and Richard will agree, then it becomes a better process for the submitting authors as well. So I think that's really important to highlight. What's good practice when reviewing? I think we all agreed that a constructive review is really important and top of the list. So making sure that it's balanced, there's positive feedback, but then also the feedback is constructive and healthy in nature. I know, Rich, you alluded to there, obviously, a little section around the reviewers and the editors working with the authors a lot more, particularly with case studies.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, just the more a researcher goes through their career, they get a lot more experience of how to write, and so sometimes it's a default assumption that it's probably going to be sort of written a certain way, in the academic way. Whereas for some of the more applied case studies, sometimes very few people have had that experience of writing those for this kind of purpose. So there's a lot more, I think, constructive, proactive engagement. And sometimes, the editors step in and just say, this is a valid point and here's what you can do about it, because it's not as obvious to an author with less experience how to address a comment sometimes. So it feels a little bit different, very different to a conventional process with that level of kind of support and translation happening in between. But I think it's useful and necessary in the short term to get the journal kind of thriving.
Excellent. And I'll ask the same question to Ian in a sec as well. How do you find reviewers find reviewing for your respective journals? Maybe are they in academic review journal, maybe like JASP Mindset reviewing an academic piece of work, or are they very easily able to empathize with the remit of the journal and the slightly different slant of what's required?
Honestly, there are some people who have been there from the start, and I think just drop into a review and know the sort of intention right now. And there's also, we like to keep fresh flow of reviewers, and it's useful each time to jump in and say, just so you know, this might be a little bit different to the default assumption, and try and, if we're sending it because we've sort of done the desk review and think there's something in it. So, if you can help them tease that out, that's more useful than sort of just looking for the fatal flaw. So we're trying to be supportive as much as possible. It might be that in a few years' time, it becomes much more selective and strict. But for now, we want to get these ideas out there. There's space and scope to do that. So we're trying to be supportive and constructive as much as possible. And the applied angle can be very different, because it's less about kind of how does it help the theory and more about how can it help other practitioners enact the theory, or how can it help them do good practice. And that's a different kind of judgment to make.
Sure. Excellent. And is that a similar thing with Journal of Sports Psych in Action, Ian?
Yeah, very much so. I suppose one or two kind of differences for us, or similarities in some way and differences in others. We always get one of the editorial board to review each article, as well as an external reviewer. And those external reviewers, we are getting more and more keen on having, let's say, supervisors getting their PhD students doing the reviews. As long as it's, as you say, constructive, well written, and has a positive slant, whether it's a reject or an accept. at the end of the day, it gives the author some positives to work on. We're quite keen to, look at developing reviewers as well as looking to develop authors. So, it's become, one of our kind of remits, I suppose, in line with the association, really. It's about all aspects of practical applied sport and exercise psychology, and reviewing is just as important as authoring. So
yeah,
trying to help there. CPD as well.
I roll this phrase out. I've done it in the last 2 talks we've done around this topic area, but I think it sums it up very nicely. Review unto others as you would have them review unto you. I think that's a nice little mantra around that. So if you're undertaking the review process, imagine you were the authors, and are your comments and review comments, how would you take them as the author? Are they fair? Are they balanced? And is the tone constructive in sort of nature? On the whole, I'm sure the 3 of us will all agree the reviews that we get in for our journals are very positive and constructive, but we do get the odd occasion when the tone is inappropriate, and we do try to step in as editors and sort of mediate that either directly to the reviewers or in our feedback letters. But yes, if you are engaging in a review, it's a constructive process. If there are some fatal flaws in the manuscript, do by all means point them out, but do that in a constructive manner. That will help the authors along and encourage their development in that sort of stage. I think one thing that's really important, I think we all sort of have consensus on, is the reviews need to be substantive. The odd occasion you get a couple of lines from a reviewer, which it doesn't help anyone at all. So please, if you do accept the review, try and make it as substantive as possible. That's not an essay or War and Peace, but some general comments that sort of around the main criteria or remit of the journal, and maybe that may for JASP, that may be the conceptual elements, the significant potential for significant advancement to knowledge, the quality of the methodology that's undertaken, and the potential applied focus within that. So some general comments around the journal remit or criteria for publication, and then by all means some specific line by line comment to help with the actual sort of details within the work as well. Some manuscripts, obviously, it would take a very long time to correct each error or mistake that's in there line by line. So we'd encourage reviewers to use their discretion. And sometimes general comments can allude to the need for a lot of typo or some grammatical issues or writing challenges as well within that. So Ian and Richard, I don't know whether you want to add anything to that in that particular area.
No, I think from my perspective, it's exactly spot on. As you say, if a manuscript has got a kernel of something important about it, something that's going to make a difference, then a bit like Richard will put a bit of extra time and effort into helping the authors find that, and hence it's that balanced nature of generic topics that perhaps it misses it conceptually, or it's a little bit out methodologically, but those specific comments that are going to make a difference is really what we'd ask people to focus on.
Yep. I mean, sometimes it is necessary to really emphasize a point, and I suppose it's probably just about being transparent about that, and sometimes pausing to explain, because there's no other sort of vocal tone or body language. I'm about to say something which could be quite jarring, and I need you to understand it's trying to help, and I need to persuade you to try and change this part because you might not want to change it. So I think it's quite nice to try and do that sometimes. I might not always succeed myself, but I do try. And I think it's really important that that the tone and the feel of it is supportive, even if that support, as Steve was alluding to, is to say, okay, it's probably not going to make it, but if you choose to rewrite it, it's not dead in the water. It's just not going to be a good fit for this journal. So when you rewrite it or submit elsewhere, this is still helpful.
Excellent. Yeah, and as you say, tone and pitch is very important, isn't it, as well? So, and around when you do give your feedback, there's a reviewer, then please, bullet points or general comments and sort of line by line specific comments are very helpful. And from an editor's perspective, it's very easy for us to then synthesize and digest what the reviewers are trying to get across, and then that helps us make our process our overall decision as well. So yes, we probably can't mention it enough, but engaging in the review process, volunteering to be a reviewer and giving a constructive review are vitally important, and we do sort of support that to continue. Okay, so that's a reviewer's perspective. Just sort of like to sort of come into the sort of final lap of the presentation and look at the publication process. So if you're thinking of submitting to one of the 3 journals, you like the sales pitches that one or all of us have given, and you've got a piece of work that fits with case studies or Journal of Sports Psych in Action or JASP, then what are the next steps? How do you go about trying to maximize a potentially successful submission? So just a couple of little hacks, publication hacks, if you like, to help with that. I'll state the obvious, and I'm sure we'll all laugh at this, but making sure the manuscript is within the journal remit. So each journal has got on its online, on its website, has got the journal remit, what it does publish, and the particular areas within that. So please check your work, your potential idea, against what the journal remit is. If you're still not sure, then go to the journal itself for the actual list of the publications or a recent volume or issue, and see if the type of work that's being published fits with your work that you've written or the idea that you're thinking about. It's very important that you do write for journals. We've all got great ideas and great work, but that process of how you shape it to a particular outlet is really important. It has to be of a suitable quality, whether that's empirical quality, significant advancements in knowledge, methodologically strong, whether that's an important message to sell from a professional practice perspective, or it's a rigorous case study from a research or a professional practice perspective. So quality and fit within the journal are very key criteria to sort of consider, irrespective of the outlet. And then lastly, there are rules and regulations for most journals. I know some journals are now going to a process of just submit a manuscript in whatever format you want and whatever style you want, and then we'll do the journal does the processing at the other end. But traditionally within the sport and exercise psych field, there are sort of rules and regs and discipline to adhere to in terms of your submission. So read the guidelines on the website, make sure it fits in terms of page length, in terms of format and style. And that's an easy hoop or boundary to overcome, if you like, in that sense. So if your journal, if your idea or your paper fits within the journal remit, it's of a suitable quality and it adheres to the formatting guidelines, then it should pass the desk submission process. It'll come to the editor, they'll read it, they'll like the look of it, methodologically, conceptually, the fit, and then in terms of the formatting, and then it'll get sent out for review. Hopefully it'll get sent off to at least 2 very constructive reviewers who will enjoy the work, give you some very good feedback and some guidance on that, and you'll have the review process back. And an editor, hopefully if it's all gone well, will give you maybe a revise and resubmit or an accept with potential conditioning with some modifications to make to the work. So when you are thinking of preparing your revision and you've had the feedback from the authors, and it's to go and maybe resubmit or revise some of the work, a couple of little things to sort of consider or think through. Firstly is, it may seem daunting that there are 2 or 3 pages of comments collectively by the reviewer and the editor on what you need to change and how, but please be thorough and go through and consider all of the reviewer's comments in that particular process. We do get some instances where certain comments from reviewers are ignored by authors, or a whole reviewer is ignored totally. It doesn't help that process, because if essentially when you revise your work and you prepare a response to the reviewers, that goes back to the reviewer. So if I'm reviewing a piece of work and I can see that the authors have not chosen to consider any of my suggestions, that I've painstakingly spent time, and as Richard has talked about, thought about the tone of how I get that across, that probably won't all go well in the reviewer's mind for when they're considering and evaluating the work. So it's important to sort of respectfully consider all of the reviewer's comments in the response sort of process that you go through. And when you do that, please respond in an appropriate format. Various different ways of doing it, whether that's listing each comment in a table, in a column, and then an accompanying column around that to show where or how you've changed it or how you've considered the comment, or whether that's listing each comment and then you commented on your changes below. There's lots of different ways of doing that. The more time you spend in your response document and more considered in how you address each of those comments, the easier it is then for the reviewer and the editor to work through all your changes, to understand the narrative of how you have or haven't changed certain aspects of the work, and that will engage the review process a lot more and help with securing a more positive decision, I would say, within that sort of process. Ian and Richard, is there anything maybe you want to sort of jump in on there and comment on that?
No, I think that was very comprehensive, Steve. Not much to add at all.
Okay.
I really agree with the idea of using a table. For me, I was working with a colleague recently who just sort of the response letter was just C track changes, and that's not very helpful for the poor reviewer to then sort of go all the way through and find and remember what they wrote and then see if it's been enacted. So you really want to say, here's what you wrote, here's my response, and exactly here's the line number where it's been enacted. And when that happens, I once had the opposite effect where an author got back in touch and said, you can't possibly have read that and accepted it that quickly. But it was the first job of the day. The email landed and I was able to go through and say, comment, response, done, check. And I had these screens that I'm working on here and I could just go done, done, done. And it was the easiest thing in the world to accept that paper because it was so crystal clear. The other thing I'll just say, I don't know if this is a rule of thumb or just my sort of gut speaking, but I think the bulk of the work in that response, probably 8 or 9 out of 10 comments should probably lead to a change in the manuscript. And if you find yourself sort of doing a lot of rebuttals and saying no to this, no to this, no to this, and unless the review was done in the wrong spirit, it's very unlikely that they're happy to see the comment just rebutted and not lead to a change. So unless you want to get into a prolonged argument, you're probably better off saying, okay, we've tried to clarify that. Okay, we've actually done that word for word. Thanks very much. It's, to me, the balance is usually far away from no, we're right and you're wrong. That's usually not the right tone to go for if you can possibly avoid it.
And we tend to be quite protective and almost myopic about our manuscripts when we submit them, don't they? We spend a lot of time over them, either collectively or individually or collectively with our research team when our submitting authors. And any sort of threat or comment of changing things, whether that's practically having to go back and physically change things or challenges to a conceptual methodological sort of approach, can be quite a threat to that, isn't it? So I think overcoming that initial, I've got to change something, or why are they sort of questioning this approach? And the reviewer has more of a broader focus, don't they? They're interested in commenting on the work and how it fits with the journal, and actually asking you to write a little bit more here about a theory or describe a method in a little bit more detail. Probably is for the benefit of the reader as well as much as the author. And therefore, it's only going to help your work because it's going to enhance understanding, and probably it's going to enhance the potential for it to be cited more and used and within that. So it can be very difficult sometimes when you're there in the trenches and, I just want to get this published, actually to see the sort of the bigger picture and be acceptive of reviewer comments. I think that's probably something that comes over time, doesn't it?
That phrase is probably crucial. That difference between I just want to get it published versus I want it to actually be read and understood widely is a whole big different world. And if you think, okay, how will I make sure that, say if there's 1,000 readers start reading it, most of them get to the end, and I'm not losing people along the way, it's a very different way of thinking about a paper.
It is. It takes more time, it's more consideration, but then it comes back to the quality of the piece of work, doesn't it, and its potential to engage and leave a landmark with the journal and the reader. Excellent.
Just to support Richard's point there, I think my advice, especially to young authors, is choose your battles. I suppose it's a bit like your PhD viva. When you're defending your PhD, you've got to agree with most things that the examiners or the reviewers say, and you can probably battle on 1 or 2 things, and you might get away with it. But if you battle on everything, you're probably going to be on the losing end at the end of the war.
And as from an editor's perspective, once a resubmission comes in and has kindly looked at it and considered it all in the detail, as Rich says, if a reviewer comes back and says, listen, this person isn't listening to me, they've not considered, they've disagreed with everything I've asked them to do, I think I've been reasonable here, I don't think we can consider their work, then as an editor, then you're more likely to actually reject the work because there hasn't been an engagement. So as Richard and Ian have talked about that, if you engage with the reviews, you may not like everything, you may not agree with everything, but if you engage, they feel engaged, then they're more likely to support your work and maybe ask you for 1 or 2 more revisions to be made. rather than say you haven't engaged and I don't think this should be accepted at all. So that engagement is really key. The last thing, and again, sounds really stupid, we get a lot of submissions that are rushed or resubmissions that are rushed, and we ask you to maybe show where you've made the changes in the manuscript in red text or track changes, and you can see lots of typos and errors in that. So please proofread, because if you're asking the reviewers to highlight and focus on the changes you've made, and the changes you've made don't read very well or make sense to a certain extent, then that's not going to all go well in influencing the overall sort of decision on the manuscript. So that's a small thing, but again, it's an important thing to consider.
Well,
so,
I mean, just to reiterate there, Steve,
yeah.
I think most journals will give you 2 attempts. You know, as you say, if on the second attempt they're not listening and they're not adjusting things, then I suspect it will be consigned to the bin pretty quickly.
Yeah, no, great point. Thanks, Ian. So in terms of the resubmission process, if you've considered all the reviewers' comments in detail and engaged with them, agreed or disagreed accordingly with the right balance, if you've responded with an appropriate format and provided a signpost or a roadmap, if you like, to where the changes have been made and how they've been made, that's excellent. And then if you've proofread it and it all reads good, it's good to go, then that's going to maximize your chances of the resubmitted work getting accepted and published in the journal.
I've just had one last thought, maybe, if you can. Are we still going?
Yeah.
One of the things I'm reflecting on a lot recently, which I might have been guilty of when I was younger, but right now it really sticks with me, was sort of trying to write to sound sciencey and clever rather than just write to be understood. And I just, it's so obvious now when people are trying to sound and they use longer words than they need to. And you just say it in plainest possible language so that almost any undergraduate reading it will just go, I know what you mean. The only technical words are usually from theories or from methods, and that's probably enough. Anything else is just kind of, usually for me, it's almost like an insecurity thing, like trying to overcompensate. Just be as clear as humanly possible, and that's often a much better read for whoever it is, editor, reviewer, eventual reader.
Excellent. Thanks, Richard. That's brilliant.
Can I make one philosophical point a bit similar to that? Something I say to my PhD students which usually perplexes them. I'm sorry this paper is so long, I didn't have time to make it short. Try and write clear and concisely, and just to reiterate exactly what Richard's saying there, if it's really obvious to the reader what's going on and it's short and to the point, then I think that for me is the hallmark of a good paper.
Yeah, no, excellent. Thank you both. That's brilliant. In terms of specific comments, etc., then obviously as editors and such as editorial members, all the way through the process, informal inquiries are very much welcome. So if you've got an idea for a paper, ping an email to the editor, paste the abstract in, give the intention, say why you think it fits with the journal remit, gauge the opinion of them. Don't just send something in cold, fingers crossed, without actually having engaged. We're all very happy to feedback, and whether we say, yeah, that's great, it fits, or actually I don't think it fits, but actually have you thought about this journal or that journal? We're very, very happy to take informal inquiries. And that's all the way along the process. So if your manuscript's submitted and you get review feedback and you're not sure anything, please engage with the editorial staff all the way through the process. Our job is to publish manuscripts of a higher quality as possible, relevant to our specific remits. And the more dialogue we have is really important in that sense. In terms of further steps or guidance, each journal will have a recent editorial over the last couple of years. It says, this is how you write for our particular journal. It may be a short editorial or a longer one, but if you go to the specific journal, it might be on the website, or it might be sort of within some of the free articles you can access within that journal. There'll be a paper there saying this is how you write for this particular journal. I was lucky to be involved in one we published in JASP that's online at the moment. Very short plug. That's how to publish sort of in the sport and exercise psychology academic journal field. I'm sure Ian and Richard will be able to point to sort of similar sort of pieces that are within the respective journals. And Ian, I'm sure you've written 1 or 2 articles, editorials in your time as editor around to sort of write for case study, Journal of Sports in Action. And I'm sure Richard, the similar editorial exists there as well.
Yeah.
So yes, if have a look, there'll be those particular papers or articles or editorials they tend to be in, and follow them up and have a read through. And again, contact the editors or the editorial staff for more details. So just to finish off, I think just to reiterate really, 2020 has been an interesting year for all of us for various sort of different reasons and challenges. We are seeing a lot more papers being written, particularly across sort of the academic sports psychology journals in the field, whether that's anecdotally due to staff having more time, not traveling, working from home more, or less engagements, I don't know. It's great that there's more academic papers being out there, but that writing academic papers is on one part of the publication or the academic process of being a scholar, if you like, within our field. The other part of that process is undertaking reviews. So I would urge you, if you are thinking about and you are writing more papers and submitting, that's great. But don't forget the other half is about actually actively engaging and undertaking reviews as part of that process as well. We used to talk about every paper. If you submit a paper to the journal, you might be expected to do a couple of reviews for that journal, particularly if it gets published as well. So please do bear that in mind. For every paper you submit, expect to sort of engage in one or two, a couple of reviews for that journal or various other journals. So without reviews, the whole peer review process falls down, and the credibility and the strength of our field, which is great at the moment, will be challenged. So please do, if you're asked to do a review, please do accept. The editors will be happy to give you a little bit more time because of the current climate, I'm sure. If you haven't done any reviews and you'd like to do it, contact the editor, contact the journal, and we'll get you on the reviewer list. So Richard, Ian, I don't know whether there's anything you want to add along to that.
My only thought is, I mean, like you, I have a rule of if I'm going to submit a paper, I'm obviously expecting 2 reviewers for mine. So I'm going to try and do 2 reviews at some point in the future. That's like a rule of thumb I try and work by. I'll just add, obviously, to me, it's obvious. If you review, you end up becoming a better writer as well, because you start to learn what works and what doesn't. So for me, it's the cheat sheet. Once I gradually get the hang of being a good reviewer, I must become a better author too.
Excellent.
Nothing really to add. I think you guys have summed it up really well there.
Excellent. And I think that goes back to the point we raised earlier around CPD, and reviewing is good for your professional development, whether you're starting off or whether you're old and you haven't got time to access works or read as much as you can. Reviewing is a really good sort of process as well. So I think we'll finish on that. That's a great point to finish with. So thank you both. So thank you for watching, listening, tuning in, whatever you call it online. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference online and virtually. We'll hope to see you all next year, hopefully in person in some sort of guise or form. And as I reiterated earlier, please do email us, any of us, if you want to follow up with any sort of informal questions or well. So thank you, Richard. Thank you, Ian. And thank you, everyone, for your time and for listening. And enjoy the rest of the conference.